in Columbus, trying to organize a group of clergy in a congregation-based organizing fashion. And so he was assembling clergy around him. And then shortly after George was on the scene, John Ashbery came into town. Of course, John being with DART, another organizing network, John was beginning to develop an orbit of clergy around John. And so sometime, and I would guess it was probably in 1994, our National Catholic Campaign for Human Development Office and the regional representative for our area, Area B, who was Randy Kiesler. Actually, Randy came in and said, boy, it seems kind of counterproductive to have two groups organizing half the clergy in Columbus. Is there any way that we can get these groups to work together? So Randy and myself and some of the clergy that were involved in that at that time began to see if we could bring the two groups together. And so Father Tom Petrie was very involved at that particular time. He was in St. Dominic's Parish, and there were some others. Father Stan had a meeting at St. Augustine and Gabriel in those years where we got clergy together to talk about the purpose of congregation-based community organizing. And lo and behold, after about 2 years, we were able to form a project, and it was called the Columbus Organizing Project. And I think it was groundbreaking in that there had never been an organizing project in any city in the United States, I believe, up to that time, where two national organizing networks had agreed to work together. So the Columbus Organizing Project was staffed by both the Gamaliel Foundation and by DART. And so they both offered training, and they worked together for, I would say, a period of about 2 to 3 years in that format. And then at the end of that period, I think both national organizing networks agreed that it was in the best interest of the organization to pick one of the organizing networks to work with and to go that route. And so as a result, DART was the chosen network, and the organization BREAD was formed. So that was the genesis of BREAD.
I'm Howard Apotheker. I'm a rabbi at Temple Beth Shalom. I've been a rabbi at this congregation for 37 years. This is my last year. And I became involved with BREAD quite early on in its origins, actually before it was known as BREAD. As many of the people, I'm sure, who are being asked to give their histories with the organization can attest. And in fact, my earliest memory is with John Ashbery coming from Dayton and getting together with a group of people that he managed to organize based on his organization in Dayton. And I thought there were some very eager folks, including one of my colleagues who I'm sure will or has been interviewed. His name is Cantor Jack Chomsky. He's from Tifereth, Israel, and he became involved early on too.
The first Nehemiah Action was held in February of 1996. It was at New Salem Baptist Church. So this was the first event, people coming together from a cross-section of the community. And we didn't know what was going to happen. There had been strong commitments. And about an hour before the pre-meeting was supposed to start, the parking lots at the church were full. People were parked all up and down Salem Avenue. And folks kept coming and coming and coming. The meeting, the hall at New Salem was standing room only. So it was a real confirmation that people of faith had a basic desire to live out the prophetic mandate, and the turnout was the most exciting thing. The cross-section of people from all different sides of town, different religious traditions. It was interfaith, interracial, socioeconomically diverse. That was the crowd, the turnout, the enthusiasm, the excitement. That was the most exciting thing.
Nehemiah Action. We called them just the action meeting, I guess, at that time, or as my mother always referred to it, the big meeting. And we would always say, always, actually, when she would hear about something bread related, she said, "Is this the big meeting?" But the very first one, my brother John and I went to. We were Immaculate Conception was not a founding member of Bread, and so our parish was not involved or had not joined Bread at that point. We did join within about 6 months, but we were invited by some friends of my brother's who were from North Broadway United Methodist Church and New Salem Baptist. And what I remember about it is that we got there just as the meeting was about to start, and I remember the energy in the room. It was jam-packed. We were directed up to the balcony, and it was a very, very impressive, exciting night. The organization of it was amazing.
Was the very first Nehemiah Action, and there were over 1,000 people there, and that looked like a lot of people then, because I hadn't been to a Nehemiah with over 3,000 people yet. And it was pretty impressive. What I remember the most was that the mayor didn't show up, and we let the mayor know that we weren't happy that he didn't show up. And I really liked that a lot, that a public official can't just disrespect over 1,000 voters, residents of his city, like that, because we don't have large amounts of money. You know, we hold public officials accountable to be accountable to the people of this city. And we treat public officials with respect, and in turn we expect to be treated with respect. But we make up for our lack of influence through money by building people power. So that was my first Nehemiah. That was a very long time ago, and it's hard to remember New Salem Baptist Church. That's where it was.
My work with Bread has impacted my life in ministry, in countless ways. I think it has been, in a monumental way, tremendously an asset to our context, and to me to be able to work with other brothers and sisters from different hues, cross-fertilization of Protestants, Jews, Catholics, Unitarians, the list goes on. Being able to recognize the world is very large, and that I think understanding that power is the ability to help or hurt, and if you don't have any power, you really can't help or hurt, systemic evil, and you have to do that by coming together with other people who have the same common interests of justice in mind, and to be able to work on these issues that you could not execute by yourself. So Bread has been that apparatus of really changing, systems that disproportionately impact people who perhaps don't have a voice, who may be perceived to be more the vulnerable and gullible people. So in that regard, it has been a monumental blessing for this congregation and myself, in understanding that the world is very large. John Wesley said, the world is my parish. I think it has allowed me to see that, working with others, that in fact the world really is our parish, and making it a better place.
I think there are a lot of things wrong in society, not just in this country, all over the place, that need correcting. And if people just sit back and let things happen, they're going to go on, going to follow the easiest way. And there's not going to be a change, and not going to be any improvement. People who suffer are going to continue to suffer. people who are neglected are going to continue to be neglected. The only way something happens is if you get behind an organization such as Bread, and that Bread's very welcome because by yourself an individual can't achieve much. So doing it by way of joining Bread was the obvious solution, and I always believed in showing up. That's a big part of winning battles, is you got to show up, you got to be there. The other reason is that my background is that I was born in Germany right around the time of when Hitler came to power. We were Jewish. My parents tried to get out and find a way out, and everything was locked. There was no way out. We have family in America who sent us affidavits and so on. That wasn't good enough. American law, it's kind of complicated, and I'm not going to go into it, but there was not going to be a permit to get out of Germany for years and years and years. And things got worse, and it got closer and closer, and in fact the Second World War started and we were still in Germany. It was quite obvious that that was life-threatening. So my father found an old friend from way back in Switzerland where he had lived and worked, and he made contact again with that friend of his. He's not Jewish, and it's been a long time since I have talked to him, but he explained that we had this need. And I was around 6 years old perhaps at the time, and he said, look, he needs to find a way out for his family. This friend, after a long time of absence, was there for us. He looked around and he found somebody among the Swiss border guards. There was somebody who was prepared to let us in, even though the Swiss government wasn't going to give us a permit. He did so because he understood the human need. And even though as a border guard, he was derelict of duty. He was supposed to keep us out. We didn't have a permit. He understood the need, and he was there. Total stranger. To this day, I don't know his name. I think I'm only here because that man showed up when he was asked. And my father's friend showed up and found somebody to help. So individuals can make a real difference. I know other cases, again, where individuals have made a difference, and that's been sort of a whole life's orientation. And that what brings me to Bread. It's simply the most natural thing in the world.
Well, Bread has been a great thing in my life, I'd say. For the last 20 years, it's been a way to, as we often talk about, put faith into action. It's also connected me up with lots and lots of people across the community that I never would have gotten to know any other way, and that's been a wonderful thing too. So I think in our parish at Immaculate Conception, it's been a kind of a steady and constant presence and a reminder to folks in the parish that there's issues that affect people out in the broader community that we need to be connected with and involved with. And so in lots and lots of ways, it's been a very positive part of my life. I got very involved in the effort around the Housing Trust Fund in 1999, 2000, 2001, 2, in that period, and that was really the peak of my involvement as far as the research committee and issue activity and all the rest. And there were lots of memorable meetings, and both big and small, in that process. We all, I think, from the Bread standpoint that were involved in it, learned a great deal. Our focus was affordable housing and trying to increase the supply of affordable housing in the community. This was something that was very much on Bread members' minds, and it came out of the process of one-to-ones and house meetings. And so we focused on that. I think one night in particular stands out for me in terms of my involvement. As I say, Bread was very focused that this fund should support truly affordable housing and housing that would benefit people in poverty, people that maybe were working minimum wage jobs, and so that was our constant and steady focus. The mayor's office and Mayor Coleman, they were supportive of the idea of a trust fund, but they did have a different view about the purpose of the fund, and they did not want to see it limited in terms of its commitment. In other words, Bread focused on the commitment that half of the money that went into this fund would support truly affordable housing. And so that was a big point of contention, really, in the whole process. And one night the mayor called sort of an impromptu special meeting at City Hall after hours. And the head of our committee was actually Father Stan Benetsky, and Father Stan was unable to attend that night, and so they asked me to sit in, as it were, for Father Benetsky. And it was a very memorable meeting when a lot of this disagreement about the trust fund and its purpose came to a head. I won't go into all the details, but a friend of mine afterwards, Bread friend, Charles Nabrit from Church of Christ of the Apostolic Faith. Charles has passed away in recent years, and he was a fabulous person. But he said in the evaluation that the Bread members did afterwards that I had run into a buzzsaw and I did an excellent job as the log. So that gives you some sense of the meeting. If they say that any good meeting has tension, I'd say this is one of the greatest meetings I was ever a part of. The end of the story is happier, though. Bread stuck to its guns, and we stuck to our position and our view that half of the money that went into this fund and continues to go into this fund every year, millions of dollars, half of that has to be focused on truly affordable housing. And to me, it was a great lesson in perseverance and in staying the course and in not letting the tension and the conflict that can come about in these public discussions throw us off course. So
I got involved with Bread through my congregation, Christ United Methodist Church, and that was around 2003, maybe 2002. And during that time, Bread was having issues that they called hotspots, and they were asking congregations to submit hotspot issues, and ours was an apartment complex called Bexley-Zettler. The apartment complex was run down, it was broken into, it was burned, yet people were still living in it, and we could get no resolution from the owner. And so we brought it to Bread, and Bread decided to have a mini action on it. And the action was held at our church. At that time, it was City Council Sensenbrenner who came, and we got a commitment from him to have the city code enforcement come out and shut the establishment down so that it could be resold and into what it is today, which is a very nice apartment complex. And it was really cool because that was probably also my first action. And there were 450 people at the church, which pretty much filled up our church, and it was very exciting, and I was hooked since then. Bread allows me the opportunity to get with other people to deal with solvable problems. You know, you get real frustrated when there are problems that seem so enormous that you can't even bite off a piece of them. Well, Bread has gotten down to a process, a very beautiful process of picking issues that are solvable within a small amount of time. And I like to see solutions. I'm not a complainer that just complains. I have to try to solve the problem, and Bread was that type of organization.
Bread was housed in the First English Lutheran Church, which wasn't too far away from one of our churches, the congregation of St. John Holy Rosary on South Ohio Avenue. So our pastor at St. John Holy Rosary was Father Bob Scullin, a Jesuit, and Michael Cobbler was the pastor of the First English Lutheran Church. And the two of them got together, and they were focused on trying to get city leaders to address the problem of abandoned housing. So they found the 12 worst examples of properties that had been abandoned and where there were problems. People were there was crime activity around those houses. They were unkept, they were unsafe, there were children that could be playing in an area that was unsafe. They were very worried about it. And so they developed a bus tour. And so they got a couple of CODA buses chartered, and they got all these city leaders, the safety director and different city leaders, to get on these buses. And they had a bus tour of what they called the Dirty Dozen. And these were all houses that had been abandoned, that code enforcement wasn't requiring the landlords to do anything about them apparently and tear them down. And so they took people around to see all of these properties. They described the problems in the neighborhood, came back to Holy Rosary St. John for a meeting, again, a public meeting where they were asking for commitments from those city leaders. And lo and behold, after a period of time then, the city was very good about taking action, and that problem began to be addressed. But it was a wonderful example of it was a bread project, but those two men, Father Scullin and Michael Cobbler, they were instrumental in getting that to happen. So, a success for bringing our faith into the public square in a way that can achieve a greater level of justice in the community.
And that's one of the main things I like about Bread, is the fact that we do bring people together who have like minds and are willing to work on issues together. It also connects us, again, as people with like mind, people of faith who are concerned about the community, so we can work with one another on side projects too, but also support Bread. And I only know of one time that we really stepped out of the process to join in the payday lending initiative that was going on in the state to get legislation passed to deal with and try to rein in payday lenders. And we thought we had done a pretty good job. Unfortunately, there are enough loopholes in the law that was written that job still isn't finished, and we're still working on that. But it was terrific to see Bread step up with our member churches, synagogues, and parishes to say, this is wrong, we need to do this on a state level. And that was terrific. I think we're wonderful in looking at local issues, and that's still important. And Bread does give us the opportunity to work together. And because of the process, again, with the house meetings and then the parishes and churches that come together, and then the meeting where we pick the next topic, I mean, that's just really a nice process, because it is long-term involvement. It's not that quick burn satisfaction. We're here for the long haul. And the follow-up to everything we've ever done in Bread is still happening. And that's genius, because you can't change a politician's mind and think it's going to stay there. You really have to keep going back and reminding them, these are the steps we've taken, here are the promises made, let's make sure we're following through on those promises, and that we maintain that level of commitment and concern, whatever the area or the topic, to keep our community safer and growing.
I have told often is about Ed Leonard, who was the county treasurer, that at first we couldn't get him to work with us on the land bank. And it took about 3 years, I believe, but I was at the county commissioners meeting the day when they voted it in. Oh, everything was wonderful. Everyone loved Bread, including Ed Leonard at that time. And what we did is we mugged him with a Bread mug, and I loved it.
Well, we had early on in the organization's life, we had a core of congregations on the Near East side of Columbus. And Columbus really is, a tale of two cities. And it has been for quite a while. Today, there's a hip, kind of short north sections, and then there's everybody else. And so that was true in the Near East Side. You had plans for downtown. You had Bexley, and the Near East Side was in between. So one of the impacts of that is rundown housing, a lot of prostitution, a lot of drug dealing. Our office at that point was at First English Lutheran Church. So we came up with a campaign to target, to get the police and code enforcement and others working together to clean up some of the properties on the Near East Side. And so we had a series of meetings. We're putting pressure on the health department, on code enforcement, on the police department. And in the middle of that campaign, there were two inspectors of the health department who would regularly kind of stop by the office and encourage us. What you're doing is great. This is what we need to do. We need to have a coordinated effort to really make a difference in the community. So they would come by and cheer us on, and that's when we knew we were on the right track in that issue. Yeah, it's sort of related actually to that Project Queen Sweep campaign. So we found that there were a number of vacant and abandoned housing on the East Side, Near East Side. We identified the 12 worst, called them the Dirty Dozen. And in the course of doing our research, we found that several of these properties had been abandoned, and so their deeds had reverted to the state of Ohio. And so we were trying to get the state to pay attention to these abandoned properties, which were now in their name. So we were ready to hand deliver some petitions to the governor. And we went to the governor's office, and we were stopped at the ground floor of the Reif building because our delegation it was really 24 people, some children, a couple of older women in wheelchairs, several nuns from Holy Rosary St. John Catholic Church, and along with these letters we were going to hand deliver to the governor's office, people were carrying signs. And so we were stopped on the ground floor, and one of the officers said, you're not allowed to carry signs in the building. And Reverend Michael Cobbler, who was our spokesperson, pointed to, well, these are not signs, these are letters. And the guy said, the letters are okay. So then he said, okay, group, write at the top left-hand corner of your sign, Dear Governor, and sign your name at the bottom sincerely. And then he turned to the guys, so everybody did that, and then he turned to the security officer and said, these are not signs, these are letters. And he said, okay. And so we went up to the top floor of the Reif Center. That's where the governor's office was at that time. And we really were a motley crew of ordinary citizens, but you would have thought, because they had a half a dozen burly state patrol officers there ready to take out the nuns in the wheelchair that were delivering these signs. And it's just an indication of how much of a threat ordinary people are to people in power, that they will turn out the troops, literally the state troopers, to intimidate people when they exercise their basic rights.
Bread has been more than just bread itself for me. It has taught me a process by which to tackle any problem. I'm a community advocate. I'm president of civic associations and collaborations, and I use the bread model, the agenda items and how things are set up, putting times against the various issues so that everything is done very efficiently, delegation of ideas, listening process. I use that in all the things that I do in my day-to-day community work. And I have to just praise Brett for that, because John started me out with, and I was very timid and I was very afraid, and he would throw me out into all sorts of situations and sent me to training. And I am the person I am today, the bold community person that the politicians like to run from because of Brett, and I really am appreciative of that. Happy 20 years.